Well, it is great to be in the great state of Michigan once again. It is great to be at an incredible manufacturing firm, Visioneering, and it is great to be in the state that I think is going to be pivotal to giving us 270 electoral votes and making Donald Trump the next president of the United States. Now, it's hard to believe, but we've only got 33 days until the election. Now, that's a good news, bad news situation because that means we've got a very limited amount of time to make our case to the American people that Donald Trump ought to be reelected president. But the good news is that means only 33 more days for Kamala Harris to gaslight and lie to the American people, and that's a pretty good thing. Now, we of course had a debate last night, a vice presidential debate. I thought it went pretty well. Now, it's funny because, we did this debate, and then I talked to the president afterwards, and we talked a little bit about, what actually happened, and, some of the points that I made, some of the points that Governor Walz made. And, he made this observation. He said that Tim Walz said that he was friends with school shooters twice. And that's something I actually didn't notice that Tim Walz had said that on the debate stage. And I said, did he really say that, sir? And he said, I'm telling you, man, go and watch the clips. He said he was friends with school shooters twice. And I said that was probably only the third or fourth dumbest comment Tim Walz made that night then. Because look, I got to be honest, I feel a little bad for Governor Walz. And the reason I feel bad for him is because he has to defend the indefensible. And that is the record of Kamala Harris. And think about this. For the past 8 weeks, Kamala Harris, who never won a Democrat primary vote, has gone around the country saying that she is on day one going to tackle the affordability crisis that's making it hard for you to afford groceries, housing, and everything else. She says on day one, we're going to make energy prices lower for American consumers. And on day one, she says, we're going to tackle the instability and conflict all over the world. Well, Kamala Harris, day one was 1,400 days ago. So what the hell have you been doing that whole time? Why don't you get to work? Instead of just talking about what you're going to do, why don't you actually do it? Here's the thing. I'm running to be your next vice president of the United States, and I'm incredibly honored to stand here and ask you for your vote and ask you for your hard work. But if we win, and I believe that we are going to win in 33 days, my friends, I feel very confident about it. But when we win, the American people will have given me an awesome responsibility to represent them on the world stage, to advocate for Donald Trump's policies, to work with Congress to get things done for the American people. I get sick of having a vice president of the United States for 3.5 years pretend that she bears no responsibility for all of the policies that have made this country weaker, less prosperous, and less secure. And part of our responsibility, part of our job, my friends, over the next 33 days is to remind Michiganders and everybody else that, yes, Kamala Harris is at fault for the Inflation Explosion Act. Yes, Kamala Harris is at fault for the explosion in federal spending that drove inflation through the roof. Yes, Kamala Harris is responsible, as the border czar, for the wide open border. Kamala Harris has been in power. She caused the problems. We're not going to entrust her to solve the very problems that she created. We're going to trust Donald Trump with the presidency of the United States. Now let's talk a little bit about manufacturing, because I know we got a lot of employees and a lot of family members who work with Visioneering, a great American aerospace company. We believe, Donald Trump and I believe, that one of the biggest mistakes our leaders made is that they decided over 40 years that we didn't need to make our own stuff anymore. And this company stands as a proud and stark contrast to that, because right here in Visioneering, You've got 350 American workers that are making great American products. We're proud of you. We're going to fight for you, and we're going to build on that great track record.
Oh, I know the Vance. Please.
You know, my papaw was a union steel worker for almost 40 years. And the steel mill that employed my papaw had almost 10,000 jobs at one point. Now it's got about 2,000 jobs. And the steel mill, we're one of the lucky ones. Because a lot of those great American steel producers, they didn't just shed 8,000 jobs. They went out of business altogether. And why did they do it? They did it because other countries used literal slave labor to undercut the wages of American workers and destroy our industries. And Donald Trump, if we stand for anything, we stand for an end to that practice. We're going to build more in America. We're going to manufacture more in America. We're going to make more in America, and we're going to do it with American workers and build American prosperity in the process. That is our promise. That is Donald Trump's solemn promise. Now, here's the thing. Of course, Visioneering is a great aerospace company. But we got a lot of other proud industries in the state of Michigan and a lot of proud industries that are not thriving thanks to Kamala Harris's policies. Now, where did we go in this country where you've got Kamala Harris who wants to tax working people so that rich people, she wants to subsidize rich people to buy electric vehicles made in China? Is that a good idea? Absolutely. It's not a good idea. Now, here's the thing. My papaw, like I said, was a union steel worker, and he was a little gruff from time to time. I love my papaw. But you know what? He had a word for the kind of policies that Kamala Harris is pursuing, where we're going to tax American workers and then send their jobs overseas. One word, and that was bullshit. Doesn't make an ounce of sense. And it's not just American workers and Michigan workers in particular. I mean, look, we've got the proudest auto industry in the entire world built right here in the state of Michigan. As a Buckeye, it's hard for me to admit that, my friends. It is hard for me to admit how good Michigan workers are at making automobiles. But why are we trying to tell Americans that they've got to drive electric vehicles made in China? Why don't we send this message? This is America. Drive whatever the hell you want to, because we believe in freedom and we believe in choice in the United States of America. And look, if we pursue those policies and say, yeah, if you want to drive an electric vehicle, by all means, drive an electric vehicle. But if you want to drive a Michigan-built gas-powered car, that is your right, and we're going to support your choice to do whatever you want to do, and we're going to build prosperity for Michigan workers in the process. But thanks to Kamala Harris's policies, this is a person who loves to pretend that she stands for American workers. Well, nobody stood as strongly and as proudly for American workers than Donald J. Trump. He did it for 4 years, and he's going to do it again. So just in the last few years under Kamala Harris's leadership, I'm going to read this to make sure I get my facts right. Stellantis announced that it was going to lay off 2,500 Michigan auto workers who make the Ram 1500 Classic. What a disgrace that is. A great American automobile, and those jobs are going to get destroyed and either replaced with factory jobs in Mexico or completely eliminated altogether, because Kamala Harris doesn't want to empower Americans to buy Michigan-made automobiles. Last year, GM let go 1,300 Michigan workers at 2 separate facilities. And Ford is currently rolling back a lot of its EV production because a lot of Americans don't want to buy EVs. They want to buy the cars that they want to buy. Now, why are we doing this to our own workers? Why are we doing this to our own industry? Why are we doing this to our own country? Because Kamala Harris has decided that she's going to pursue policies that make her donors, her green scam donors, rich, and she's going to impoverish a generation of Michigan auto workers. I say, hell no. Let's empower and enrich Michigan auto workers with the leadership of Donald Trump. Now, look, this is not just about, 2,500 jobs, my friends. That's not just a number. Think about that. That is 2,500 American families that have a family supporting wage, and that disappears. thanks to Kamala Harris's policies. That's 2,500 moms and dads. They're going to have financial stress they didn't have before because of Kamala Harris's policies. That's 2,500 families. They're going to be worried about putting food on the table or paying heating bills, because we all know it gets pretty cold up here in the middle of a Michigan winter. That is 2,500 families made to suffer, not because of an act of God, not because of something that happened accidentally, but because our own leadership failed to do its job. And if this election is about anything, it is about getting back to some common sense economic principles that put American citizens, American workers, and American consumers first. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Every single day, that's why we exist, is to serve you, not to destroy your jobs like Kamala Harris. Now, of course, remember the promise that was made, and Tim Walz made this argument last night. And one of these things that really, really annoyed the hell out of me is he said, well, look, here's this economist who says that Donald Trump's plans are going to lead to higher inflation. Well, first of all, Tim, Donald Trump was already president for 4 years. We got rising take-home pay and lower inflation, so I don't think those economists know what the hell they're talking about. But even if you ignore the evidence of what Donald Trump did in office, look, what these economists are saying is that if we ship our entire industrial base off to countries like China, it's going to make American workers richer somehow. It's going to make our goods cheaper somehow. Well, we've been living through the inflation of the last 3.5 years, and we know that when we make our country less self-reliant, when we pursue the policies that Kamala Harris says that we ought to pursue, it makes Americans poorer. It drives up the cost of food and of housing. It makes our country less prosperous, and it makes our nation more dependent on people who don't like us to make the critical stuff that we need. We got to get rid of that. Stop listening to the economists and start listening to common sense in this country. But think about this. They said, here's the deal. Tim Walz has the audacity, and Kamala Harris has the audacity to say that, well, if Donald Trump's policies are enacted, that's going to lead to higher prices for American consumers. Tim, we already ran this experiment once. Donald Trump's economic policies worked for American families. They worked for American consumers. But here's the thing. Think about this. If a Chinese company wants to hire a literal slave laborer making $4 a day, and they want to import the goods made by that slave laborer, then it's going to make Americans poor. Because, of course, we shouldn't expect American middle-class workers to work for a slave wage in China. We ought to expect our middle-class workers to be able to support a family on those wages, and that's what we're going to fight for every single day. So here's what you got to do. To prevent those companies and those countries from undercutting the wages of American workers, you got to be willing to impose tariffs. Fight back against the theft of the American middle class. Penalize those companies that are shipping jobs overseas and give a tax cut to American workers. That's how you build prosperity for this country, and that's what we're going to fight for. And let's just recap what Kamala Harris's policies have actually done. The average Michigan family is spending over $1,000 per month to pay for what they could have bought 3.5 years ago. That's $12,000 a year, a hidden tax of $12,000 a year just to be able to buy what you could have bought 3.5 years ago. That's not pro-working people. Kamala Harris has presided over policies that have seen the cost of housing go up by over 50%. That is not pro-working families. She's seen policies that have seen the cost of eggs go up by more than double. Gallon of milk is now about $4 in the state of Michigan. Groceries are up 25%. Kamala Harris's leadership has been tried and it has been found wanting, and Americans, we want to get back to common sense. We want to be able to afford a nice living, a nice house for our families, and to do that, we have got to elect the common sense leadership of Donald J. Trump, and that's exactly what everybody in this room is going to do. Now I want to talk about just something else that, credit card delinquencies are about 9% right now. That means a lot of American families are sacrificing. They're not paying their credit card debts so they can afford groceries or they can afford the mortgage. What a disgrace and what a sad commentary it is on Kamala Harris's economic policies that you've got hardworking people who are doing everything that they can to provide for their families, and they're falling further behind. Not because they're not doing their job, but because Kamala Harris isn't doing hers. So and ma'am, you're right. Kamala Harris doesn't care about this because she doesn't understand, because she doesn't talk to anybody. She's afraid of interviews. So she doesn't talk to people, and she doesn't realize that her economic policies are making it harder on American families. And you all know my story. I talked about it a little bit last night. But I was raised by a grandmother who sometimes would refuse to turn on the heating at night when times got especially tough. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes forego paying for her own medicines so that she could put food on the table in our family. And I remember feeling, even though money was tight, that thanks to my grandmother, I never really lacked for anything. But American grandparents and American parents shouldn't have to make those sacrifices to begin with. If you work hard and play by the rules, you ought to be able to afford a good life for your family. And that's what Donald Trump and I are going to fight for every single day for the next 4 years.
What about that?
And I want to talk about one more issue. We're going to, of course, take a few questions from the reporters, but I want to talk about one more issue. Because the American media, and especially Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, they don't want to talk about how this illegal immigration crisis is a theft of the American dream from American citizens. And we see this in small communities. We see this in big cities all over our country. When you let in 25 million people, you know what that does? That stresses municipal budgets. So a lot of cities and towns can't afford to provide for their own citizens because they're focused on providing for people who shouldn't be here. You know, hospital wait times, because illegal aliens use hospital emergency rooms primarily. So hospital wait times have gone up in the state of Michigan. They're close to 3 hours for American citizens who want to go into the hospital and see a doctor. We've got so many problems. Housing. You know, when you let in 25 million illegal aliens, and they compete with Americans for scarce homes, that drives up the cost of housing, and that is a major cost of the housing crisis. I had the debate moderator attempt to fact check me last night. She said, what's your evidence that illegal immigration promotes and increases housing cost increase? And I said, well, first of all, common sense. When you let in millions of people who shouldn't be here, you got to house them somewhere, and those are houses that ought by right go to American citizens. Donald Trump and I are going to fight for that every single day. American homes for American people. But there's also, to talk about Tim Walz's economist that he loves to cite, our own Federal Reserve has commissioned a study that shows that when you let in a lot of illegal aliens, it jacks up the price of housing. So how about this simple principle? Kamala Harris wants to give amnesty to millions of illegal aliens. She wants to bankrupt Medicare by giving Medicare to illegal aliens. Do we want that? She wants to bankrupt Social Security by giving Social Security to illegal aliens. Do we want that? Here's the Donald Trump plan, and here's the Donald Trump message to illegal aliens in this country. In 6 months, pack your bags because you're going home. That's what we're going to do. And you know, you heard this a little bit last night. You hear a lot of talk about compassion when the issue of illegal immigration comes up. Well, let's talk about compassion. Because I'm the father of 3 beautiful young kids. I don't think that it's compassionate to empower the Mexican drug cartels to engage in sex trafficking along our southern border. That's not compassionate. I don't believe that it's compassionate to flood American cities and towns with fentanyl that is killing our citizens by the tens of thousands. I don't believe that it is compassionate to allow our southern border to become a drug trafficking and business zone for some of the most evil and terrible people in the world. You know what's compassionate? Closing that border down and putting the interests of American citizens first, and that is what we're going to do. You know, because these guys, they love to talk about threats to democracy. Well, as Donald Trump will often remind you, he took a bullet for democracy. So I don't think that any person can accuse the guy of doing anything other than fighting every single day to make this country more prosperous and to make the world more peaceful. But when the media talks about threats to democracy, you know what a threat to democracy is? When you have Kamala Harris running for president despite not earning a single vote from Democratic primary voters. That's a threat to democracy. You know what else is a threat to democracy? When big tech firms and major American companies and big government censors American citizens and deprives them of their voice in the town square. That's a way bigger threat to democracy than anything else going on, and we're going to stop. We're going to stop it right away. Because look, I genuinely think this is one very big difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Look, I disagree, of course, with Kamala Harris. I disagree with Governor Walz. I disagree with a lot of the folks who support him, but I would die fighting to defend their right to speak their mind, even if I disagree with it. And I think every single person in this room believes that because we believe in free speech. And as a person who was raised by a couple of working class blue collar Democrats, I want to say to every Democrat who's watching at home, every Democrat who's in this room, you are more than welcome in Donald Trump's Republican Party. We're the party of common sense. We got a big tent, and you're welcome in our movement. Because whether you agree or disagree with us about tax policy or regulatory policy, I think a lot of Americans are saying they're sick of the censorship. They're sick of being told what to think and what to say. They're sick of being told that they're not allowed to be friends with people they disagree with politically, and they're tired of being told by their government to shut up. Because we believe in the First Amendment in this country, you have every right to petition your government and tell them they're screwing up, and that's exactly what Kamala Harris is doing. And that's why Bobby Kennedy endorsed Donald Trump. That's why Tulsi Gabbard endorsed Donald Trump, because we believe in persuading our fellow Americans and not silencing them. And that is a big difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. You hear these people talk, and Governor Walz mentioned this yesterday. He talked about you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. And you know what that line is from a disgraced Supreme Court opinion. We believe that the solution to bad ideas is to debate them and persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris believes the solution to things she disagrees with is to silence you and to shut you up. It's disgraceful, it's anti-American, and we will not stand for it in Donald Trump's political movement. So I want to close before I take some questions from the media. And I just want to remind you that we got to look through Kamala Harris's lies. She talks about all these great plans that she has. And look, some of them she straight up copied from Donald Trump. So some of them I'm like, Kamala Harris, that doesn't sound that bad. You went on DonaldJTrump.com and copied and pasted it. She's going to put on a red MAGA hat next thing you know. But look, if you've got all these great ideas, Kamala Harris, I've got a message. Why don't you try them right now? Because you're the sitting vice president and you haven't done a damn thing for American workers or the American people. The sitting vice president cannot say on day one, we're going to tackle the affordability crisis. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and your policies caused the affordability crisis. She can't say on day one, we're going to make the borders more secure, because she's been the border czar for years, telling Americans that the border is secure. She ought to do something about it now instead of lying and gaslighting the American people. She talks about restoring American leadership to the world and bringing back peace and stability to the world that has turned to chaos. And when she says that, I say, Kamala, I've got a really good idea for how we can bring peace and stability back to the world. Vote for Donald J. Trump and bring him back to the Oval Office. So to all of you who are here and all of you that are watching or will see some of the clips of this later on, I just want to tell you that we have the greatest country in the history of the world. We've got flying in here, and trust me, as a Buckeye, it is hard to admit it, you have got one of the most beautiful states in the entire United States of America, especially this time of year. I love being in Michigan. We've got the best natural resources, the best people, the best workers, the best history anywhere in the world. And I know a lot of people feel like the American dream is out of reach. I know a lot of people feel like it's gotten way too expensive to afford food and energy. It's gotten way too expensive to pay the rent. And I just want to tell you, please do not give up on this country. Because as broken as the leadership of this nation is, it's going to change in 33 days, but only if we get out there and work for it. So to every American out there, we're going to bring back the American dream. We're going to bring back affordable groceries. We're going to make housing and rent possible to afford for normal American citizens. We are going to cut the border crap out and close down that border. We're going to bring the American dream back, but only if Donald J. Trump is back in the White House. We got 33 days. Let's make it happen. Let's fight for it. Let's work for it. And we're going to make him the next president. So let's take a few questions from the reporters, and I always like to start with the local reporters first, and then we'll do the national folks if we got time afterwards.
Senator Vance, first of all, congratulations on last night's debate.
Thank you.
I did get a chance to speak to some voters here before you stepped on stage. I spoke to Jeffrey and Bert, and they said that they loved how the debate was civil and policy focused. But then I also got some opportunity to speak to voters outside of the event, and I got a question from Robert from Pontiac, and it's a two-part question. I hope you can answer it.
Sure.
So the first part is, with issues where Americans are divided, if elected as the next vice president, how will you bring folks together, especially from the other party? And if there is an issue you disagree with Donald Trump, how will you make your voice heard for the people?
Well, so you said the person who asked that question is named Robert?
Correct.
So my message to Robert on the first question is, look, I think that the reason this country feels so divided is because of failed leadership and nothing else. You talk to, and look, I genuinely believe this. With a lot of folks who are going to vote against me and Donald Trump, there are a lot of people out there who are fundamentally good human beings, but the leadership of the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, is an absolute disgrace. And here's the way, again, why do we have so much division? And why do we have so much rancor in this country's political debate? It's because Kamala Harris and her allies are trying to silence the American people rather than engage with them. When you try to censor your fellow citizens, when you try to shut them up, you breed division and hatred. Donald Trump and I are going to bring this country back together by encouraging the free exchange of ideas and this idea that our leaders ought to persuade their fellow citizens, not try to shut them up, which is what Kamala Harris wants to do. Open this country up. Open up the dialogue and open up the debate, and that is how you bring American citizens back together in these divided times. But on the second question about what do you do when you disagree with Donald Trump, the answer is, first of all, Donald Trump is at the top of the Republican ticket. He will be the next president of the United States. I've got two responsibilities. The first is to support the president in enacting an agenda that I believe is going to lead to rising take-home pay and lower inflation for American citizens. That's number one. But of course, if I disagree with the president, it is my responsibility to talk to him about it and to offer honest counsel in private. And one of the things that I love about Donald Trump is that he takes advice and feedback from everybody. As much as... You know, it's funny, when the president, the only conversation that he and I ever had about whether I might become his vice presidential nominee was the Saturday before the convention. If you remember, that was the Saturday where he was shot in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I saw him that morning in Florida. We ended our conversation. He hopped in a plane and flew to Pennsylvania, where, of course, an assassin nearly took his life. And you know what the president told me? He said that he talked to everybody about who his vice presidential nominee should be. And I think that's one of the great things is he's willing to take feedback. Of course, he makes the final decision, but he's willing to take inputs from everybody. And he even said that he was talking to the Mar-a-Lago gardener about who the vice presidential nominee should be. And I said, well, sir, what the hell did the Mar-a-Lago gardener say? Because this affects my life. I'm very curious what these people you're talking to are saying about this very important decision. But I think that it's one of the great things about his leadership style is he is in charge, he is in command, but he makes decisions after getting as much information as possible, and that's how the country should be led. You know, it actually raised an important question, you know, Robert, and I know, of course, the journalist who's asking this question. Look, one of the things that people in D.C. say about Kamala Harris, and it's Democrats that say this, it's people she served with in the Senate, and it's also Republicans, and of course they say this in private, but they'll say Kamala Harris is very insecure. She doesn't like to be challenged. If you don't like to be challenged and you don't like to engage in open debate, you should be nowhere near the Oval Office of the United States of America. Next question.
Thank you. Charlie Langton from Fox News, WBJ here.
Charlie.
I talked to a lot of people here. They also said you were very cordial last night in the debate, and the message got through. But compare your style to Donald Trump's style, where he was a little aggressive. Do you think that Donald Trump's message sometimes is lost because of his aggressive style?
No, Charlie, look, I think, first of all, there is a media caricature out there of Donald Trump that is so different from the man that I've come to know. And I think that, you know, when he called me last night, you know what he said? He asked me how my wife was doing. And he said, you know, you just had a hell of a debate. I'm sure that you were nervous. You had every right to be nervous, but go and have a nice meal with your wife and go and enjoy this moment. Like, that's the Donald Trump that I know. People say, now look, the other thing I love about Donald Trump, and I think it's true of all of us, we can be so devoted to and so grateful to this country and its incredible opportunities, but then also be kind of pissed off that the leadership is failing this great nation. There's no there's no tension in saying, on the one hand, we've got the greatest country in the world, and on the other hand, Kamala Harris is doing everything she can to screw it up. And I love that Donald Trump can do both of those things at the same time. He can go out there and talk to the American people and be warm and engaged. He can talk to a normal American citizen about their struggles in paying for groceries and housing under Kamala Harris's policies. And then he can go on a debate stage and tell Kamala Harris that she ought to stop screwing up and she ought to stop talking about solving the country's problems. She ought to go and actually do it. That's the kind of president we need. That's the kind of leader that we need. And I think his message gets through. Thank you. Next question.
Hey, Senator. Craig Mauger from the Detroit News newspaper here. You were talking about your opposition to EV mandates. My question is, do you think the government should have any role in incentivizing, providing financial assistance to battery plants, to electric vehicle plants? Michigan is poised to benefit from some of these investments. Will you allow those to go forward? Will you try to interfere with those? Thank you.
Well, look, I think there's certainly a role, and I believe this, I know Donald Trump believes this, in encouraging innovation, but there's a difference between promoting innovation and sending hundreds of billions of dollars to favored industries that make their products in China. These are two very, very different things. And here's the problem with a lot of these EV mandates is that this money was supposed to go to American workers, but Kamala Harris's IRS found every way possible to allow that EV subsidy to go to manufacturers in China and not in the United States of America. And here's the other problem with it. It's not just auto jobs that we're worried about here. Think about all the people who make carburetors. Think about all the people who make transmissions. There's an entire supply chain in the auto industry that China dominates when it comes to EVs and America dominates when it comes to gas-powered cars. So before we go and subsidize the EV industry, let's open up the American supply chain for that industry so that American workers and American consumers benefit. All of the minerals, all of the rare earth materials, a lot of the battery technology, a lot of the supply chain for these electric vehicles is made in China. And with the one hand, Kamala Harris wants to make it harder to build that supply chain in the United States of America. And with the other hand, she wants to send money to an industry that's built in China. It's disgraceful, and we got to stop doing it. Invest in American workers, not in Chinese workers and Chinese firms. And I know we unfortunately have to go to our next stop in the great state of Michigan. So I'll take one more question, and then I'll offer a final observation. Then we'll hit the road.
Hi, Senator Will Jones from Local 4.
Hey, Will.
I spoke with some elected officials or election officials last week about their concern about people who are trying to undermine our elections. Why didn't you answer the question last night during the debate about who won the 2020 presidential election?
Well, look, here's the simple reason. The media is obsessed with talking about the election of 4 years ago. I'm focused on the election of 33 days from now because I want to throw Kamala Harris out of office and get back to common sense economic policies. But I also think you can believe that America needs to have secure and free elections, but also talk about the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, Democrats in the U.S. Congress blocked a piece of legislation that would have ensured illegal aliens don't vote in our elections. If you believe in American democracy, if you believe in our constitutional republic, you should be trying to strengthen American election integrity and not weaken it. So we're going to talk about election integrity because I believe that every vote ought to count, but only the legally cast votes, and that's why we fight for election integrity, and that's why we care so much about it. Now this actually leads me into my next point, because I want to talk about, look, Democrats, whether they agree with what Donald Trump and I say about some of the criticisms we have, for example, I think that we make it way too easy for people to fraudulently vote in this country, okay? I think that we should have passed the SAVE Act that would have ensured illegal aliens don't vote in our elections. Apparently, Kamala Harris disagrees because she fought that legislation every step of the way. But the reason why Kamala Harris should actually sign on with our pro-election integrity efforts, things like common sense voter ID, is because it gives the American people confidence in the most important thing that we do when it comes to our government, which is voting. I want every American to have confidence. And by the way, to all of you listening out there, I believe that we are going to have the safest and most secure election in 2024 that we've had, because the RNC is fighting for election integrity in a way that it frankly wasn't 4 years ago. So get out there. So I encourage folks, get out there and vote. And this brings me to swampthevote.com. And I want to make sure I got this right here. It's swampthevote.com. Go to swampthevote.com. Check your registration. Check your polling location. It'll give you some good information about how to vote and also how to volunteer. Because, you know, one of the things that we're trying to do to ensure common sense election integrity is to promote more poll watchers. We've got more poll watchers in the Republican Party today than we had 4 years ago. If you're interested in helping us out and making sure that every legally cast ballot counts, then you can go to Swamp the Vote and help figure out how to get involved in those efforts. We believe in election integrity. I know all of you do, but election integrity only happens if all of us fight for it. But I got to be honest with you, I think that we're in a better shape in 2024 than we have been in a long time. We've done a lot to make our elections more secure, and what we've got to do, my friends, is get out there and vote. Never give in to the despair that your voice doesn't matter. We've got all kinds of ways to vote. You can vote early. You can vote by mail. You can vote on election day. Look, I don't love that we have election season in this country instead of election day, but it is what it is, and we've got to play by the rules that we've been given. And if we play by those rules over the next 33 days, we are going to win. We are going to send Donald Trump back to the White House, and we're going to save the American dream for all of our citizens. But let me say one final thing here. And I want to point out a couple of people that I didn't mention at the top, but first of all, you guys have got a great Republican chair in the state of Michigan, Pete Hoekstra. Pete, please wave and say hello. We've got an old friend of mine from before either of us were involved in politics, the great Congressman John James. Where's John at? I know he's around here somewhere. John's got a beautiful family, and he's been a great advocate for the state of Michigan. I hope you guys reelect him, and I believe that you will. But let me just say this final thing before we got to hit the road. I have learned over the last 8 weeks more about this country than I could have possibly hoped to learn. And I mentioned this last night, but the thing that has affected me the most is all of the people who come up to me, and some of them are struggling to put food on the table, and they have the generosity of spirit to ask me how I'm doing, or to tell me that they're praying for my wife and kids. And it makes me realize that we have got the greatest country in the world. So I don't want us to ever get so frustrated with our leadership that we forget that we've got the best people, the best jobs, the best workers, the best natural resources. The only thing that I believe is broken about this country is the failed generation of leadership of people like Kamala Harris. So you have not just an important opportunity, we all have an important responsibility to return the people's government back to the American people, to have a president who puts the interests of America's citizens first, to close the border, bring down the cost of groceries, make housing more affordable again, and to make sure that the American people have a government that serves and fights for them. 33 days, let's get to work and make it happen. God bless you all. Thanks for having me.